Radha Madhava. That's good.
Okay.
Mridanga, Kartal?
Just got that, I didn't see him or done. Maybe just went downstairs.
In that classroom. You want to bother them?
Okay, we'll check.
Gaura Premanandi, Hari Hari. Thank you for coming. Today we're going to talk about your favorite topic, sense gratification. And also your least favorite topic, austerity. Which should we start with first? I'm going to start with sense gratification first. But it's going to be a very disappointing discussion. Not what you think it is. Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sanyavari Paschatya Deshatarine Mukam Karati Vachalam Pangulangayate Girim Yakripa Tamaham Vande Siguru Dinatarinam. So, I wanted to read some things Prabhupada has written and discuss. Does anyone need translation into a language? Other? German, Chinese? What language?
Spanish.
Spanish.
You translate it. Okay.
So, there's a famous verse in Bhagavad Gita. Well, famous is relative to how well you know it, but this is a famous verse on sense gratification. And it's from the 5th chapter, text 22. Anybody know that verse? Yes. Evate. Adyantavanta. So, we're going to analyze the Sanskrit. Very interesting. So, 522, Yehi samsparshaja boga dukkha yonaya eva te adyantavanta kakteya nateshu ramate buddha. So, I'm going to read you the meanings of the Sanskrit words, and you're going to tell me the translation. Okay? Is that fair? Are you ready? Yea, those, he, certainly, samsparsha ja, by contact with the material senses, boga, enjoyments, dukkha, distress, yonaya, sources of, eva, certainly, te, they are, adi, beginning, anta, end, yantaha, subject to, konteya, o son of Kunti, na, never, teshu, in those, ramate, takes delight, buddha, the intelligent person. You already know what it means, right? You know the translation. Okay. So you can't play the game. You can only play it if you don't know the translation. Who would like to guess what it means? Well, let me give you some hints. There's some opposite things going on here. In the beginning, it talks about enjoyment. Samsparshaja means when any sense touches its object. Your eyes, the object of your eyes is something beautiful, or your ears, some nice music, or touch, something, smell, taste. So, samsparsaja means contact with the material senses, and bhoga means enjoyment. So, but the next word is confusing because the next word is dukkha. Dukkha means what? Yeah, distress, unhappiness. So Krishna is saying, samsparsaja, when you contact the senses with their objects, there's enjoyment, and the next word he says is dukkha, distress. So what does that mean? It's really interesting. Yonaya means the source or birth. So Krishna is saying the enjoyment that you get from your senses is the birth of your dukkha. It's the source of your dukkha. Doesn't make sense, right? Well, for us it makes sense. It may not make sense to everybody. So then Krishna now explains why. Adi, who knows what Adi means? Beginning. Anta, like Antya-lila. So it has a beginning and an end. And then the next thing Krishna says, he said, well, that's why it's miserable, because you ever have this experience where you enjoy something, and when it's over, it would actually have been better if you didn't enjoy it because you suffer because it's over? You ever have that experience? Like a nice vacation? You have to go back to work or school or something. You're more miserable than when you started the vacation, isn't it? Yeah. So, when you contact the senses with their objects and you enjoy, it's a source of misery because it has a beginning and end. Actually, the more you enjoy it, the more you suffer when you lose it, right? Everybody's looking for that perfect relationship. If you want the perfect relationship, you should go to the heavenly planets, because then you can have that relationship for a long time. Plus, you don't get old. I mean, you're old, but you don't grow old. And you enjoy, and you only have one child. So you don't have to worry about contraception. So, but sound good? Anyone interested? Do we have any volunteers who want to try it? Anybody interested? Ladies, you should be very interested. No gray hair, no wrinkles. Only one child? Not bad, huh? And that goes on for so long that you forget there's death because it's so long. And nobody's getting old, so you can't... if less people get old, you don't think about death, because there's nothing around you that looks like it's dying. Does that make sense? Like for us, it's easy. You just look at old people, and you go, oh my God, that's going to be me in 20 years. No, actually, if you're stupid, you'll think, that's never going to happen to me. So, I don't know if you know this, but on these heavenly planets, when you live a long time, you have this youthful body, beautiful body, never gets old. You enjoy tremendous amounts of sense gratification, and you live thousands of years, and one day you die. It's like all over. And that suffering is so intense. It's so intense, you can't take it, and you just cry. That you've lost that enjoyment. For us, it's much different, because many of us, when we get old, our bodies are falling apart, and it actually will be a relief to leave the body. Right? How many of you are old? Can relate to that? We have a few. We have people who are like, yeah, dying would be kind of a relief, especially the way the world's going. Maybe if you're young, you can't relate, but if you live long enough, your best friend will turn against you. You know, this, that, and the next thing will happen. At some point, you'll feel like it wouldn't be such a bad idea to die, because the world is difficult. But so for us, it's easier. But on the higher planets, it's excruciatingly painful because of the level of enjoyment they've had. So you could imagine, right? Millions, or I don't know how many years, by our standard, 10,000, más o menos, 10,000. So you could imagine 10,000 years of uninterrupted enjoyment in a beautiful body. So that's what Krishna says. Now, the last thing Krishna says, I find so interesting. It's kind of embarrassing. He says, Na teshu ramate buddha. So, buddha means intelligent. Actually, Krishna's being nice the way he says it. He says, those who are intelligent don't do this. And he could say, those who are stupid do this. But it means the same thing, right? Those who are intelligent don't look for happiness in sense gratification. Or those who are stupid do. Now, you probably have experience when we become attached to sense gratification, what happens to our intelligence? Covered. Bewildered, covered, stops working. And what happens when your intelligence is working?
We don't do sense gratification.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Prabhupada is trying to convince us not to engage in sense gratification, we wouldn't be happy. So we start off on this level, that sense gratification is a source of misery. So then it sounds like, okay, we should eliminate all sense gratification. We'll balance this out. But that's what it sounds like. And then there's so many statements about austerity. It's the wealth of the Brahmins. You get so much power from austerity, purification. So when you read these things, especially when you're a young devotee, then you think, okay, no sense gratification and all austerity. You have that experience?
Yeah.
When you're a new devotee? Yeah. Right? Because that's what it says. It says, sense gratification is a source of misery, and you should do austerity. Right? 1970, San Francisco Temple, Brahmachari Ashram. 11 o'clock to bed, 4 o'clock to rise. Everybody. Standard. Breakfast, 8 chickpeas, half an apple, half a cup of yogurt, and an orange. Lunch, dal and chapatis, bas. And lunch was at 11 o'clock. Out the door for Sankirtan, 12 o'clock. All day, come back. That's it. If there were anything left over, you'd eat it. If not, there was nothing to eat, and you'd have class. Why do we do that? Because we read this verse, and we read everything about austerity. Now the next question is, how many of those devotees that were in that temple are still devotees? How long did they last? Right? Yeah. Okay, so The question that we all have to ask ourselves is, what level of austerity can we maintain, and how much sense gratification do we need, and how much is too much? And just as you ask how much is too much, you have to ask how much is too little. And just as you have to ask how much austerity would be too much that I couldn't maintain, how much is too little that I can do and I'm making excuses that I can't do. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe? You know that funny story? They were, devotees were with Prabhupada and they were talking about the attachment that develops due to sex desire. And then one devotee said, Prabhupada, I have no sex desire. You know that story? Prabhupada said, go see a doctor. So, isn't that interesting? That some young man of 22 would think he's transcended. So we were talking this morning about this problem. This morning or yesterday morning? This morning. That something very interesting happens. Well, in those days, we were doing Harinam, like 6 hours a day, not including artis. And then on the weekends, 10 hours. So you could think you're pretty transcendental, right? If you're doing Harinam 6 to 10 hours every day, right? And getting up after 5 hours of sleep. You would feel kind of transcendental, right? So what often happens, especially in the immature state, that one is transcendentally situated because of the intense engagement of devotional service, but one doesn't realize why they're transcendentally situated. And so they start thinking that transcendental situation is where that's their normal state. And that's why we had so many 22-year-olds in the early 70s wanting to take sannyas, because they thought they're transcendentally situated. Because all day Harinam, all day preaching, living together with brahmacharis, getting up very early. It puts you on a transcendental position. But what happens when you can't do that? Or, let me say it another way. What I have observed happens is that although one is on a transcendental platform, one is not actually on a transcendental platform. One is gifted on that platform, but their real platform is lower and they don't realize that. Right? Then they think, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm on this platform, and it's not actually the platform they're on. Prabhupada said something, that if you give up devotional service, you'll tend to fall back to where you were before you were a devotee, into that same mentality and the same activities. And we've seen that. Right? So Prabhupada said, there was some, I don't know what the discussion was, but I guess it was Bhakti Acharya Swami was given all his initiations after he was just a very short time in the movement. And so devotees were questioning that. But how can he's such a young devotee and getting so many initiations and getting sannyas? And Prabhupada said, well, if he falls down, he'll fall down into the mode of goodness. Because that's where he came from. So you fall down to where you came from. And so it's kind of difficult to explain, but I think you can all relate to it because you all have experience, right? You ever have experience that you think you're a pure devotee, and then the next day you wake up and you had a bad dream and you realize, well, you ever have that experience? because you hear an amazing class and you get good association and it's influencing you, and you think all this influence that you're getting is who you are, but it's enabling you to transcend who you are, and sometimes you forget who you are. And in that condition, you try to become more renounced and more austere than you can maintain. And that's why those young men tried to take sannyas. Some of them did take sannyas. I mean, they tried. Most of them couldn't do it. Only the ones who could do it were actually on that level. Does that make sense? So then the question is, well, how do you know what level you're on if you're feeling very Krishna conscious? Well, one of the things we have experience of, those of you who visit Mayapur, and those of you who are teachers who stay in touch with your students after they leave Mayapur, when they leave Mayapur, they think they're going to conquer the universe. And they think, this consciousness that I've got here in Mayapur, it's mine, and when I go back, it's just going to stay and get better. Does that happen? 3 weeks? 3-week grace period? And then reality sets in. And then you're dealing with those modes in the Western world, and you're dealing with your connection with those modes and attraction to those modes. And you kind of get more of a realistic view of where you're at. So it's a difficult topic to discuss because when you're transcendental, you are transcendental because you're getting mercy from the processes. But at the same time, you're not transcendental. You are who you are. And as soon as those powerful influences are not there intensely and regularly enough, you start to experience who you are, your more natural self. So when we're trying to figure out what level of sense gratification I need and what level of austerity I can do, we have to be realistic. One time, the devotees were talking to Prabhupada about marriage. So Prabhupada said, you have a laddu, and you think, I shouldn't eat the laddu. It's not, I don't need to eat it, it's sense gratification, too much sugar, whatever. So you think, I won't eat the laddu. But then you start lamenting, well, maybe I should eat the laddu. It looks good, and I like laddus. So you're going back and forth. So then Prabhupada said, if you eat the laddu, you'll lament that I ate the laddu, and if I don't eat the laddu, I'll lament that I didn't eat the laddu. So now the question is to eat the laddu or not eat the laddu. We have to rewrite Shakespeare. To eat the laddu or not eat the laddu. So I was thinking about the laddu analogy. And a lot of devotees, especially younger devotees, don't understand the effects of eating the laddu, the purifying effects of eating the laddu, if you don't eat too many. And so what is the laddu? In this analogy, the laddu was getting married. But getting married can be, we can use that as an example of a need that we have. You could call it sense gratification, or a need, I don't want to call it sense gratification, a need that we have to fulfill. Emotional, sensual, physical, whatever you want to call it, but a need that can be fulfilled in a Krishna conscious way. So, I get so many letters from brahmacharis in India asking the question, how do I know if I should get married or not? And so the answer is, can you tolerate not eating the laddu? Or do you have to eat the laddu so that you come to the point where you stop eating laddus? That's just how you answer the question. You agree? Yeah. So, if you can tolerate not eating the laddu, might as well tolerate it. But if you can't, if you need to eat the laddu, then don't eat too many. Don't eat so many you get sick. And don't go crazy making laddus with chocolate chips and jelly. And just eat a laddu. And eat one a day, and after a while, it's no big thing. Laddus are no big thing anymore. You get used to it. Do you realize San Francisco Temple, 1970, we did not get a sweet during the week. We did not get rice or sabji during the week. 20 years old. Okay. A 20-year-old boy who only gets dal and chapatis for lunch, chickpeas, yogurt, and some fruit for breakfast. What do you think he does on Sunday? Feast. And this might sound funny to you, but when devotees would go home to visit their parents, you know what they did? The first thing is cook halava. Because halava was like a very precious thing for us because we only saw it on Sunday. And we weren't having much sense gratification with our tongue. So if you could visit your parents, then you could cook halava. So just try to put your head in that space. How restrained we were. Right? Now, some devotees I've seen, you've probably seen them also, by nature they're austere. They like austerity. If they don't have austerity, they actually go crazy. And some of my godbrothers who are brahmacharis were very austere. Every Ekadasi they would fast. They would go on Sankirtan fasting. They would always get up first. And they all became sannyasis and had no problem. It was like their nature. It's like they would be miserable if they didn't do austerity. It was just like, go crazy. But you can't imitate that. But if that's who you are, all glories to you. Why not capitalize on that? But if that's not who you are, then you have to deal with it realistically. So then, either you tolerate I think there's three options. You tolerate the laddu, or in the first place, you don't really care about laddus. They're not attractive. So that's the people who are inclined to austerity. If it is attractive, but you really don't need it, and you can tolerate it, then yeah, you tolerate it. If you can tolerate it. You have to make sure you can. And if you can't, you have to eat it. And you have to know how to eat it so you don't get sick. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. I want to read something. This is by Rabindra Swarup. I just found this before I was coming over here. We fools of time are loath to hear this. We are in denial. As the Bhagavatam says of us, Pasyanapi na pashyati. Although we have seen, we still don't see. Our blindness is willful. We make ourselves stupid in order to be happy. Should I read that again?
Yes.
Or should I give the purport? It's basically ignorance is bliss. Because what did Krishna say? He said, the smart people don't engage in sense gratification more than necessary. And so Rabindra Swarup is saying, the stupid people do, and he said it nicely. We fools of time are loath to hear this. We are in denial. As the Bhagavatam says of us, Pasyanapi na pashyati. Although we have seen, we still don't see. In other words, you're looking. You're seeing the reality of the world. You're seeing people suffer. You're seeing old people. Like, I'm not going to get old, just them. Like, so you're seeing, but you're not seeing. You're not admitting. Yes? Don't want to see. Our blindness is willful. We make ourselves stupid in order to be happy. Like, you come back here 20 years and everybody's 20 years older, right? It's like, you don't want to see that. It's like, that's depressing. You were so beautiful when you were 35, now you're 55. Oh my God, what happened to you? You just don't want to even think about it, isn't it? Because, oh, she's getting old, right? Or what to speak of our age, our God brothers and sisters. It's not so easy. So the Bhagavatam says, you see it, but because you can't see it, and Ravindra Swarup is saying, you can't see it because you don't want to see it, so you make yourself stupid, so you don't have to see it. And that way you can be happy. Yes? Does that make sense? No? Yes? No? Yeah. So, now, let's look at Prabhupada's books. What does Prabhupada do in his books? He makes us smart. Yes? I mean, he's trying to. Can't guarantee that he will, but he's trying to make us smart. You agree? That if you read Prabhupada's books, at least potentially, there's a possibility you could become smart. Because there's information to make you smart. You may not want to become smart. That's another thing. No, he doesn't really mean this, he means that. And as long as he means that, I can rationalize, compromise, whatever. Right? So sometimes we do that. Have you ever done that? He couldn't actually mean what he said. That's too heavy. Have you ever felt like that? And you read Prabhupada's books? It's like, no, he couldn't mean this. How could he say that? That's like... But if you take it in another way, at least the way I take it, those heavy statements of Prabhupada, when I read them, I'm like, that's just what I needed, because I'm so stupid that I needed this. Prabhu, there's a car, get out of the road. Why are you touching me? Because you would have died if I didn't touch you. So it's like Prabhupada saying, why are you shaking me up? Because you're in the middle of the road, you're about to get run over. That's how we take those heavy statements. Like, Prabhupada's like yelling at us, you stupid fool, what are you doing? That's what it is. That's what he's doing. So he's trying to make us smart, because we're not that smart. Right? Ramate, those who are Buddha, they enjoy. So, now, Krishna is saying, if you engage in sense gratification, it produces exactly what you don't want. It produces misery. And then, we have this problem. I'm a conditioned soul, and I need sense gratification. So how do I do that? The thing that causes me misery, I need it. How do I do it without it, like, destroying me? Good question, right? How do you do it? Number one, you have to be realistic about what you need, what you don't need, and how much of it you need. And number two, you have to get it as much as you need. I told the story before. It's very interesting. Well, I'll tell it. I don't think most of you have heard it. So I was living in Dallas, Texas. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was living there, and he invited me into his room. And he had a beautiful dresser, and a beautiful rug, and a beautiful bed. Not just beautiful, but like antique, beautiful, beautiful. Beautiful. Like kind of you walk in and like, wow. And he was embarrassed. He was a little embarrassed. And he was thinking, what am I thinking about this sannyasi? Sannyasi, austerity, sleep on the floor with the chadar and like that. And this is huge bed, big mattress, everything beautiful. So I actually wasn't really thinking anything. I mean, not much, not that I can remember much, but assuming that I would think it was strange, he explained. He said, my austerity is management. So if anyone's managed, they can testify that managing is an austerity. It's just like one headache after another, and it goes on 24/7. As long as your phone's on, there'll be a headache on your phone to deal with. That's what management is. Even Prabhupada said, I get a headache managing. So he said, my austerity is management. And therefore, I need this, which meant a nice room, to stay in so I can go out and do the austerity. Interesting, isn't it? I need this. I mean, I wouldn't call it sense gratification. I would just call it beautiful aesthetics. Because you could just have any bed and any cabinet and any rug or no rug. Right? But due to his nature and appreciation of beauty and fine things, he said, I need that to just give me what I need to go out and do the austerity. Interesting, right? So, what's the point? He needed those nice things so he could go out and do austerity. Sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? Yes? Interesting. But it's just the reality. I want to read you this famous purport. I'm sure you have all read it, but we'll read it again. It's from the 8th canto, 2nd chapter, text 30. Thereafter, because of being pulled into the water and fighting for many long years, the elephant became diminished in his mental, physical, and sensual strength. The crocodile, on the contrary, being an animal of the water, increased in enthusiasm, physical strength, and sensual power. Now, what's interesting about this purport is Prabhupada's talking about something that had just happened in ISKCON. And what had happened is one of the leading sannyasis had given up his sannyas and left the temple with a brahmacharini, and I think money. I don't know how much, maybe all the money. Anyway, all the money sounds better than some money. And the most beautiful brahmacharini you've ever seen sounds better than just any brahmacharini. And if you're a sannyasi and you get married, you will not just do that for anybody, right? It has to be somebody good. So we can imagine she was very beautiful. And he gave up his sannyas. And then he got married, had a daughter. And Prabhupada was very kind to him. And he had a daughter just like a week or two before Prabhupada left. So he couldn't see Prabhupada until his wife gave birth. And then he went to see Prabhupada, and he was so embarrassed. Could you imagine? I mean, he was leading devotee, and he built up the movement in one country. It was like powerful. And Prabhupada called him the Emperor of Kirtan. He appreciated his Kirtan. And I was with him in San Francisco. And at Rath Yatra Festival, after the festival was over, you know what the stage program was? It was him doing Kirtan non-stop for like 6 hours. That was the stage program. He didn't stop. He started the Kirtan, and it just went till the end of the festival. So now he's coming, you imagine you're this person, and you're coming to see Prabhupada after doing that. And he couldn't even look at Prabhupada at all. He felt so guilty and ashamed, and you could imagine. And the first thing that Prabhupada said to him when he came in is, how is your wife? Like, nothing had happened. Like, is your wife here? How is she? Oh, Prabhupada, she just had a baby. How's the baby? And this purport is about him. In fighting between the elephant and the crocodile, the difference was that although the elephant was extremely powerful, he was in a foreign place in the water. During 1,000 years of fighting, he could not get any food, and under the circumstances, his bodily strength diminished, and because his bodily strength diminished, his mind also became weak, and his senses less powerful. The crocodile, however, being an animal of the water, had no difficulties. He was getting food, and was therefore getting mental strength and sensual encouragement. Thus, while the elephant became reduced in strength, the crocodile became more and more powerful. Now from this we may take the lesson, and this is exactly about this devotee, that in our fight with Maya, we should not be in a position in which our strength, enthusiasm, and senses will be unable to fight vigorously. Our Krishna consciousness movement has actually declared war against the illusory energy, in which all living entities are rotting in a false understanding of civilization. The soldiers in this Krishna consciousness movement must always possess physical strength and enthusiasm and sensual power. To keep themselves fit, they must therefore place themselves in a normal condition of life. So here's the key point, which is the basis of what I'm coming to. What constitutes a normal condition will not be the same for everyone. In other words, what's that position where you're stable, where you have the most strength and enthusiasm to serve Krishna? It's going to be different for different people. I have a godbrother. He gets up every morning at 1:30. It's just what he does. People say, "Oh, Prabhu, I get up early." I go, "What time?" 5 o'clock. I go, "That's not early. 1:30 is early." When you get up at 1:30, you can tell me you're getting up early. Don't tell me you're getting up at 5 o'clock, you're getting up early. So he loves it. That's his nature. For most of us to do that, it would be problematic. We would become weaker and tired and spaced out, and we couldn't maintain it. Right? So Prabhupada's saying, what constitutes, what's the words? Normal condition. What constitutes a normal condition will not be the same for everyone. There are devotees, especially men, who you've probably all seen them, and maybe you're one of them, or even women also, who cannot possibly be married. It's impossible. They can't. They can't relate to women. It's just like, it's like looking at, like, here's an airplane, fly it. It's like, that's what a woman is to them. It's just like, you can't deal with it, right? It's just, they can't do it. And occasionally, they try to do it, and it's a total disaster for them and their wife. There may be women like that also, I'm sure. But I'm more familiar with men. And so, a normal condition for them would be, don't get married. There are men who have no attraction for marriage at all. Why should they get married? It's like, there's nothing there. They came into this world without that desire. So, you might look at a young man and say, he doesn't want to get married, and you think, well, that's not normal. But that's not normal for you, maybe. But for him, it's normal. And for you, that's totally abnormal. If you did that, you'd become a madman. You'd try to be a brahmachari, and in 5 years from now, you'd be dangerous. They might have to ban you from the property because you have such an intense desire for association of the opposite sex, you can't deny it. You have to do something. And if you don't take care of it, it comes out in a bad way, right? And you make a bad decision, right? Same for women. If you need to be married and you wait too long, you'll marry anybody, right? Right? She knows. Because she tells them not to get married and they still do it, right? Pretty common. I know, because she tells some of my disciples not to get married, and they do. And it doesn't work. Right? So if you wait too long, you become too hungry, and if you're too hungry, you'll eat anything. Right? So, yes? It's true. Now, I'm going to read the rest of the purport, but I have to say something else. It's very interesting. Prabhupada gave many young men sannyas, which later on he said actually none of them were qualified, or many of them were not qualified. So Prabhupada explained why he gave them sannyas. He said, in a battle you need generals. So the sannyasis are like the generals. You need generals to fight the battle. And he said, it's expected in a battle, some of the generals are going to get shot. And then he said, actually, none of you are qualified to be sannyasis. Isn't that interesting? He makes them sannyas and he says, none of you are qualified. And he said, so it's expected some of you will get shot. And so when they fell down, it wasn't like a surprise to Prabhupada. It was a surprise to us, as we thought they were infallible, but it wasn't a surprise to Prabhupada. So listen to what Prabhupada says. To keep themselves fit, they must place themselves in the normal condition of life. What constitutes a normal condition will not be the same for everyone, and therefore there are divisions of varnashram: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. Especially in this age of Kali, it is advised no one takes sannyas. And Prabhupada quotes from the verse, from the Brahma Vaivarta Purana. From this we can understand that in this age, the sannyas ashram is forbidden because people are not strong. And they said, Prabhupada, why did you give them sannyas? Because they're always bothering me for sannyas. If they stop bothering me, take sannyas. That's what Prabhupada's answer was. Because they're bothering me, I want a sannyas. I asked Prabhupada like twice or three times if I could take sannyas. And he wouldn't let me. I don't think I would have made it. And he knew that. He wouldn't let me. But at least twice I asked. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu showed us an example in taking sannyas at the age of 24, but even Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya advised Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be extremely careful because he had taken sannyas at an early age. For preaching, we give young boys sannyas, but actually it is being experienced they're not fit for sannyas. There is no harm, however, if one thinks that he is unfit for sannyas. If he is very much agitated sexually, he should go to the ashram where sex is allowed, namely the Grihastha ashram. So this is exactly about that devotee. Because right now when Prabhupada's writing this purport, that's what's happening. So he's blessing him. It's like it's okay. Another sannyasi who gave up sannyas came to Prabhupada, got totally embarrassed, feeling that Prabhupada rejected him. And he said, Prabhupada, did you reject me? And Prabhupada said, how can I ever reject you? You did so much service. So we were looking at it very externally. Oh, you're a failure, you gave up sannyas, might as well just forget you. And Prabhupada is saying, how can I forget you? You've done so much service. So it wasn't a big thing for Prabhupada. And some of the men who wanted to take sannyas were grihastas. They were GBC, and they were fully dedicated. And Prabhupada said, you're actually better than the sannyasi. He said, because you're fully engaged in devotional service, and you're better than the sannyasi. He said, because the sannyasis are not living with the object of sense gratification, but you are, and you're renounced, therefore you're better. Interesting. You heard that before? Yeah. You're living, wife, family, money, all this, and you're renounced. He said, so you're better than a sannyasi. So why do you need to take sannyas? You're already fully serving Krishna 24/7, which is the purpose of sannyas. And do you know why some of the sannyasis are called Swami and some Goswami? Prabhupada called Goswamis the grihastas who took sannyas. And he would say, he would say, you're more renounced because you gave up your wife. Whereas the brahmacharya sannyas didn't give up a wife, so you're Goswami. So he gave him the Goswami name. You're more renounced because you had a wife and you gave up the wife, or you had children, whatever you had. Did you know that? Yeah. There is no harm, however, if one thinks that he is unfit for sannyas. If he is very much agitated sexually, he should go to the ashram where sex is allowed, namely the grihastha ashram. That one has been found to be very weak in one place does not mean that he should stop fighting the crocodile of Maya. One should take shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna, as we shall see Gajendra do. And at the same time, one can be a grihastha if he is satisfied with sexual indulgence. There is no need to give up the fight. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore recommended, Stane stita shutikatan tanuvan manobhi. One may stay in whatever ashram is suitable for him. It is not essential that one takes sannyas. If one is sexually agitated, he can enter the grihastha ashrama. But one must continue fighting. For one who is not in a transcendental position, to take sannyas artificially is not a very great credit. If sannyas is not suitable, one may enter the grihastha ashram and fight Maya with great strength, but one should not give up the fighting and go away. So one other purport. Anyone have any questions yet? Because I want to read one other purport. I guess the question is that for women, how would you relate to this? Just relate to it in terms of maybe trying to be more renounced than you can be, or less renounced than you can be, or should be. Okay. I was just thinking this morning, the Bhagavatam is very interesting, because if you're interested in psychology, or sociology, or history, or Siddhanta, philosophy, Vedanta, culture, politics, it's there. And you will tend to see it if that's your interest. It will stand out. One time Maharaj Bhaktivedanta Swami was giving class and he was explaining something about Vedic culture. Things that none of us had heard. And so someone asked a question. He said, where did you learn all this? He said, it's right in the Bhagavatam. But you have to read it from that angle, otherwise you don't see it. Right? So here is a specific discussion that Prabhupada's taking out of a story that you might not otherwise understand or see it that way. But Prabhupada wants to present it that way. But it just shows that you can see it in various ways if you have that vision or nature.
I have a question.
Yes.
Going back to the example of Laudam.
Yes.
So there are some devotees, maybe I'm doing that too, who are walking around thinking, I can tolerate not eating the Laudam.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an illusion. Everyone else can see that that person is not able to tolerate.
That one day they're going to eat 10 ladus, right?
Pardon?
One day they're going to give in and eat 10
Eat
ladus.
10 ladus, right. So practically speaking, how does a devotee understand that he's not able to tolerate not eating ladus?
Yeah. I think there's a bit of false ego that we have to deal with in this equation. That could be one of the factors. You know, I want to think I'm on a certain level of Krishna consciousness. And if I'm not on that level, I could become very depressed or even discouraged. And by thinking I'm on that level, pretentiously, it gives me some kind of inspiration. And it's extremely difficult to be honest. But if you're not honest, how can you? It's like if someone comes to you and you're asking them what's wrong and they're not honest, you can't diagnose them. And they may not want to tell you because they're afraid they might be really sick and they don't want to find out. I'm sure that happens, right? Yeah. To be able to accept where we're at is not always easy because we'd rather not be there.
Sometimes we have to get slapped around a little bit by
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. I think that's a blessing. Sometimes I'm so stupid that I think Maya, I'm like beyond it, like it's just not an issue for me. And whenever I think that way, Krishna shows me, not that he shows me Maya in a way I've never seen her before. Like, wow, this is something different. I'm like, where did this come from? And it's like, I don't know where it comes from. It's like nothing I ever was attracted to before I was a devotee. And I think Krishna is just showing, like, wow. If this is material attraction, it can come in so many ways, even in ways you don't even know that you're attracted to. And it's just like, okay, reality check. And I go, thank you, Krishna. Anyone have that experience?
Yes.
That's mercy. To show you. Yeah, I'm beyond all this. And what do you think when you're beyond all that? Well, I don't have to go to Mangalarti or chant this or that because I'm beyond all of it. That's the next logical conclusion, right? I chant good rounds, bad rounds, doesn't matter. I'm just not attracted to Maya. Yes. It's okay if I don't study because I'm okay. One of the things I've learned for just people in general, not just devotees, is that it's hard to look at a problem objectively as it is. But you can't solve it if you don't look at it objectively. That's the problem. Some people look at problems worse than they are. I'm sure you have that experience. Someone comes and they're complaining about this and that, and you're looking at them going, no, you're not that bad. And somebody's not, and they're much worse than they're saying. So we do that with the problems. No, it's not a problem. It's okay. And you can see, no, it's a big problem. They don't realize it. So sometimes we don't want to deal with the problem because it's difficult, so we like to pretend it's not as bad as it is. And sometimes it's just painful to acknowledge that I'm not as Krishna conscious as I am. Like you may see a god sister, so you and her joined at the same time. And she's very Krishna conscious, and that may inspire you to pretend that you are because you feel bad not being, because actually you joined before her. So it's like, how can I be happy that she's more advanced unless I think I'm as advanced? So sometimes it's hard to be realistic. But if you're not realistic, you can't deal with the situation realistically. That's the problem. And many people do not deal with it realistically. And the other side of it is, I'm so fallen, why try? Right? Then you give in on the other level. And then you exaggerate how fallen you are. And that just becomes an excuse. Well, if I'm that fallen, why try? It's useless. Right? Have you seen anybody do that? Prabhu, can you do this? No, I'm too fallen. Ask somebody else. Prabhu, you're only chanting like a 16-syllable mantra. Yeah, I know. Lower than a worm stool. What can you expect from me? So then it becomes an excuse. Have you seen that?
There are so many pitfalls.
It's really hard because of false ego to just admit this is where I am. But one of the most interesting things that I find in Krishna consciousness is that you can't be Krishna conscious if you're not humble. And if you're humble, it's easy to see where you're at. Like many of you may have heard of Jayananda, right? So Jayananda was so humble, he had no problem just telling you how bad a devotee he was. He'd always just like, oh, Prabhu, I don't know much, and I'm not really a good devotee. And he would always say these things. Yeah, it was like, he didn't have any like image to keep to others or to himself. So, and he was always happy. Because that's what happens when you're humble. Then you don't have to have an image. And if you're not humble, then you're miles away from Krishna. Pride is what keeps us away from Krishna. And when you're humble, you're right next to Krishna. So, I think it's a problem for our movement if everybody feels they have to pretend to themselves and others. Because if you pretend, I'm like, whoa, she's pretty Krishna conscious. Yeah. And I'm a guru and I'm a man. I can't tolerate that. So then I'll have to pretend, right? She tells me, she gets up at 3 o'clock. Oh, I'm getting up at 2:30 this morning. I'm not going to let a woman put me to shame. That's actually the reason I became a devotee, because there were 2 women coming to the temple, and I was procrastinating moving the temple because, once I move in, it's like fun's over. Can't do what you want anymore. And one day I found out they both moved in. I was like, damn, I can't let 2 women move in and I don't move in. So the next day I moved in. What?
In this way, pretending was very good.
Yeah. I don't know if I was pretending. I knew I was humiliated. But if we're all pretending, then it creates a culture where everybody's pretending. It's what you call front stage and backstage. Front stage is what you show to the world. Backstage is what you actually are. So if you don't know you're backstage, then you're in trouble. Or if you know you're backstage, but you feel you need to show you a different front stage, you're even more in trouble. Because at least if you don't know it, then what you're showing is not so pretentious. It's just you're out of touch with the reality. But if you know what the reality is and you show something else, that's called pretentious. And so if we have a culture where we feel we have to show that we're more advanced than we are, that's like, what kind of culture is that? Right? That's crazy. That has nothing to do with humility. That's all about pride. Right? Yes? Question, comment?
So one side of the question was about the denial part, walking around. So coming back to the analogy, what if a person is diabetic? In other words, maybe marriage, maybe a particular service, maybe the person is not really ready. He shouldn't ruin another person's life because he has issues with sense gratification or she has issues with it. I mean, marriage especially is relevant here, but it can go to any simple thing of taking up service, taking up a responsibility in life. So how do you balance the other side of the story?
When a person has a need but they're not qualified?
Yeah.
What I tell them when I see they're not qualified, I think there's 2 ways of dealing with it. One, become qualified, or realize you're not qualified, and you're going to mess up your life and another's. And so you'll have to tolerate it. Because sometimes you can tolerate it if you actually are convinced it's not going to work. I have God brothers like that. I go, why aren't you married? He goes, I can't be. I want to be, but I can't. No woman would live with me, and I wouldn't. There's no woman I'd want to live with. So I've seen that kind of renunciation. It's not real renunciation, but it's circumstantial renunciation. So if you know it's not going to work, or you know you're not capable, you're convinced of it, even though you want it, at least it's easier because you know if you do it, you'll really suffer. And it's going to be more suffering than whatever suffering you're undergoing now. If the person cannot do that, they have to become qualified. Or third option, get married, and have this very difficult relationship and see that you're incapable of doing it, and then you realize that way. I think there's a fourth. One is very attracted, but their intelligence is telling them not to do it, and they're really divided. His intelligence is saying, don't do this, and their heart is attracted. So then it's depending on their own determination, tolerance, and intelligence. And then the question is, if that desire is strong, should we actually tell them, even though they don't want to do it, should we actually tell them not to do it? Because I see some men are able not to do it, but they're thinking about it all the time. And so, are they going to actually be able to conquer it? Sometimes it's just astrological. A year later they'll be fine. But
Or
if it...
another person. Sometimes that person they want to marry is the wrong person.
Yeah.
We should find someone else.
I'm dealing with one devotee who doesn't want to be married, but he's very attractive. But it's a paradox. He wants to be a brahmachari. He relishes that. That's what he wants to do with his life. And so you have to see how it's going to work out, if he can actually do it. But I think it's very helpful when you see someone and you know if they get married it's not going to work, to try to convince them. Say, this is just in this life, it's just not for you. You're going to have to realize that. And if they do, then it's good. For me, it was the opposite. I wanted to take sannyas, but it wasn't happening. Prabhupada wouldn't let me. And then I finally got, after Prabhupada left, appointed, and that year they wouldn't give sannyas to anybody. And then I gave up on the idea, and then 1992 or 3, again, right, my GBC, and he comes back and he goes, "Oh, I forgot to put you on the list." It was like, never happening. Right? Yeah. Krishna protected me. So that year, they wouldn't give sannyas. They gave it to one person. And he gave up his sannyas a few years later. So sometimes you want something and Krishna protects you, he won't let you have it. So, I understood that. There was no question. Krishna's like, no, don't do it. Not yet. And my wife, I wanted to take sannyas for so many years. And I mentioned that to my wife. Well, when I'm older and take sannyas, you're never taking sannyas. I will not let you take sannyas. So, in this, I had the strong desire to take sannyas, and maybe in this life it will never happen. So, whatever. That's fine. More than sannyas, yes. I am more than sannyas. Beautiful wife, beautiful daughter, beautiful home. I have no attachment. Yes?
I want to come back to the pretending part. Krishna consciousness is our Eastern society. It's like we have certain values or certain levels attached to, let's say, first initiation, second initiation. And then you can understand your level and your needs, and you can understand that you are at a low position, let's say, but you, just as an example, you have a second initiation, you get it, and then suddenly everyone is like expecting everything from you.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, right.
So how do we deal with this kind of?
Don't take second initiation. Of course, it's too late now, right? Well, that is a valid answer for those who haven't taken, to say, when you take it, more will be expected of you, right? So you become a temple president, more is expected. You become sannyasi, more is expected. You become a teacher, whatever. Right? You know my answer. It's always the same. Be honest. Just honestly say, I'm not on that level, or I can't do all those things. I might look Krishna conscious, but I'm not on that level. Just be honest about it.
That might cause problems to others also. Because not everyone is like willing to hear that.
Well, if it's, if you're using that as an excuse not to do some service, that's probably not a good idea. But if it's service beyond, if you're not following principles, then you can't go on the altar, and you have to, of course, be honest about it. But
I mean, just like simple.
it puts you in anxiety because they think you're more Krishna conscious than you are, or they're.
Yeah, or like if you are having difficulties at some point in your practice, and then you want to share your devotee, but they have this certain image of you,
Uh-huh.
and they
So
don't
they think you're
accept
being
it,
humble
and
or
they
something.
freak out, you're having some,
Yeah. That is a huge problem. I think that has caused many sannyasi to have trouble. Because everybody thought they're doing fine. And there was nobody to talk to. Or they talked and people thought, it's not as serious as they thought. Yeah, you need a good friend. At least somebody who knows you well. Maybe that person can talk to the local devotees that think you're greater than you are and explain the situation. And she feels an anxiety because she's not that Krishna conscious. It's an interesting question. It has many ramifications. From before initiation, there are ramifications. Why aren't you initiated? You've been a devotee so long. Maybe that person's not following the regular principles, but he can't say that, because if he says it, then that creates another problem for him. Because I've been involved with people like that. So they don't say it. I mean, why don't you say it? He said, I can't say it because A, B, and C. Or you're a brahmachari, you can't say it because then they'll ask you to leave the ashram, and you don't want to leave the ashram. And you have no place to go, even if you did leave. So a lot of these questions that devotees ask, I can answer them very easily from the point of view of how you should act if you're a manager. It's harder to answer from you dealing with a manager who maybe not is acting in an ideal way. But if you're a manager, then we have to be sympathetic, and supportive, and we don't want to condemn people when they open up. This is the worst thing we can do, because it'll shut everybody up if we condemn them, right? Or this last few classes I gave was about listening. So that was one of the topics, that if we judge and condemn, nobody's going to say anything. And then that makes us all, it causes us to be pretentious and hide everything. So that's not healthy. So we need, as leaders, we need to be able to listen and help. Yes?
I have a question. So, everyone should follow, the ashram they're supposed to be in, right? So, what if you are in a grihastha ashram with someone with different needs for sense gratification than yourself?
Right.
So, how do you, adjust? How do you compromise?
You make an appointment with Sri Radha Govinda and she'll tell you. Every situation is different. And if I say anything publicly, I'll get into trouble, because I already got into trouble. But so we'd have to make it private. It's a reality, because when you marry, especially young, you don't know in 20 years what the person's going to be like. Because many people have gone from austere sadhus to very unaustere asadhus. It's just the way life is. And so we have to be able to adapt to it. If making the marriage successful is important, then we have to adapt. a lot of people will put things above making the marriage work. And they'll say, no, I will sacrifice the marriage because I don't want to compromise my principles. So that's a personal choice. And that will affect your children also, your future financial security and so many things. So you have to consider all these things. Or you may consider, in the long run, maintaining the ashram will be the best thing for my spiritual life. And if I have to make some adjustment to maintain it, then that might be what I have to do temporarily. But that's your decision. I can't tell you, I should tell you not to make any compromise. That's what I'm supposed to tell you. But what I'm saying is you're going to make that judgment yourself. You're going to evaluate what's most important. So for many devotees, they don't want to make any compromise. It's like, I'm not going to compromise. If I have to compromise, rather be divorced. Okay, that's your decision. That's the best thing. Not everyone will think that way. And not everyone should be condemned if they think that way. But as a standard reply, we can't tell anybody, yeah, go break the principles. It's fine, as long as it maintains. You can't, because I can't quote Prabhupada, at least not in his books. So, but I think this situation, whether it's breaking a principle or just, I don't know what the word is, frivolity or whatever, it's a reality we have to deal with. And you have to look at the pros and cons of the situation and how long that problem is going to last. Is it a temporary thing? Maybe we read the next purport because it'll answer your question. This is Maharaj Ayati wanted one of his sons to give him his youth. Here's the verse. He asked Yadu, can you give me your youth? Yadu is one of his sons. My dear father, you have already achieved old age, although you are also a young man. But I do not welcome your old age and invalidity. For unless one enjoys material happiness, one cannot attain renunciation. Renunciation of material enjoyment is the ultimate goal of human life. Therefore, the Varnashram institution is most scientific. It aims at giving one the facility to return home back to Godhead, which one cannot do without completely renouncing all connections with the material world. So it's talking about renunciation. Then, basically he's saying, I'm going to have to become a king, and if I don't enjoy pleasure in my youth, I won't be able to renounce it when I'm older. So, that's kind of what the Grihastha ashram is about, partially. That I can't renounce it, so I have to do it so that I can renounce it. I have to eat the laddu so I can renounce it. So we could reframe your question and says, my husband wants more than one laddu a day, how many can I give him? And the goal is renunciation, right? The goal is to get beyond it. So Prabhupada says, okay, you engage in a little sense gratification, but it's got to be purifying. So that's kind of the way you evaluated it. What would be purifying in this relationship? Because that's the point. The point of the sense gratification is to become detached from it. So you don't want to engage it in a way that you become attached. You want to engage it in a way that you've eaten enough laddu, so when you're older, it's like, okay, I don't want to look at another laddu. That's the idea. So Prabhupada's acknowledging there has to be some enjoyment. So you can't renounce beyond your level of advancement. So that's a decision you both have to make. And with your guru also, if you're initiated. You can discuss with him. That's important. Is that okay, or you want a different answer? You want me to just say it?
No, it's okay.
That's- I mean, there's another side of the answer. Where Prabhupada says, if a man is fallen, you don't have to stay with him. But that's the Prabhupada's not saying to every married woman, if your husband's not following the principles, you should leave him. He's just saying, you're not obliged. As a wife, you're obliged to serve your husband. He said, but if he's not following the regular principles, you're no longer obliged. So you may want to stay and help him, but shastrically, you could. It's not a sin.
But he also said you shouldn't marry again. But he also said you can leave, but you shouldn't marry.
Yeah, he should. He doesn't want you to leave and remarry. But that's practically impossible. At least statistically, it's not. But see, what Prabhupada wanted and what he tolerated were two different things. Because he wanted certain things, but he sees his devotees weren't able to do it, so he tolerated it. Because they were sincere and they would do service. Can you imagine someone else came other than Prabhupada who wouldn't tolerate this? Yeah. So we end here, and tomorrow night we continue. Is that okay? And then, okay.
Actually, it says on the forum that you're going to be meeting